Greetings. Welcome, everyone. Very pleased to have you all join us today. And I'm also delighted and honored to introduce our panelists for today. You have their bios in the program, but I think it's almost clear that we have a full all-star cast this afternoon to share thoughts, insights, and reflections on our current moment and movement here in Indianapolis and Central Indiana. So I'll just quickly introduce them, but then you're going to hear from them as well. So starting off, we have Claudia Cummings, who is the CEO of Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. We have Tiffany Benjamin, also lead CEO of the Eli Lilly and Company Foundation. We're very pleased to have her. Alicia Collins, my colleague also from the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and Dr. Danette Howard, of course, well known to many on the panel as well as in our audience, who is the Vice President for Strategy, and she has many other titles at the Lumina Foundation. Very distinguished panel. Welcome to all of you. Now, there's so much that we can say to kick us off today, but I just want to set the stage and then turn it over to our panel to share their thoughts. Over the last few months, our community, as all of you know, we faced complex crises that have impacted Black and Brown communities disproportionately. At this moment, we have a number of innovative tools and approaches that are being used. In particular, social entrepreneurship and impact investments can act as catalysts for change. And we know that it's going to take all of us working together to face to actually address the challenges our society faces. So this panel is aimed to spark the conversation, get it started on how funders can invest more capital in people and communities closest to social problems. And with our time's urgent social and racial justice movements, the moment seems especially right to ask, how can funders do more to tackle racial injustice? In the audience, we have leaders across Central Indiana. We have students who are joining, funders and social entrepreneurs themselves. So I'll ask our very first speaker to set the stage for understanding the big picture. She's going to address specifically what role can philanthropy, big funders, large funders, individual donors, foundations, and corporate donors, impact investors, people who want to invest in social change, and then venture capital. What role can they play in helping our Central Indiana community tackle racial equity? And also keep in mind, we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic fallout. So let's ask Claudia to kick us off to tell us, what are funders doing right now? How is she actually seeing this crisis unfold? And how can funders work together to help drive social change? So Claudia, we're going to start with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Una. It's great to be with everyone today. The Indiana Philanthropy Alliance is essentially the largest network of social impact investors in the state of Indiana. We're primarily inclusive of foundations, although other social impact investors are also a portion of our network. Statewide, Indiana has 1,200 foundations that give over $2.2 billion per year. That's billion with a B. So there's lots of opportunity in terms of scale in the philanthropic sector in Indiana. We're, IPA was, I hate to say it, caught a little flat-footed immediately following the protests that took place in June, and quickly brought together a group of funders, primarily foundations from the Indianapolis area, to talk about how we as a funder community could address racial equity in the city of Indianapolis. Several of those that were participating got together and established a racial equity fund that's held now at CICF, and you're probably going to hear a little more about that, launched with over $2 million. And that's an example of how the philanthropy community can come together quickly and mobilize to address immediate needs within a community. In addition to the co-investment example that the Racial Equity Fund might illustrate, a number of IPA members and others in the community have made unbelievably significant investments in the fight for racial equity over the past several months or this year. Some of those participating here, like Tiffany at the Lilly Foundation, $25 million, Danette and Lumina, $15 million, and unbelievably, the Lilly Endowment, nearly the largest investment in their history, $100 million has been given to the Urban League to work through issues of racial equity here in the city of Indianapolis. So there is tremendous interest and investment and work going on in this area in Indianapolis. But we are comprised of many different types of grant-making entities, and there's so many additional types of activity in addition to just grant-making. The philanthropic ecosystem includes organizations of all types that are socially minded. For example, there are some tools that I just wanted to highlight here as we get started. There's impact investing. There's two types. The most common type that you'll hear about is that which is more hands-off, more national or international, where an organization or an individual might choose to do their stock investments in a way that requires that organizations first have an equity statement, better yet, an equity strategy that they're actively implementing. So that's something that folks can do as individuals or as corporations. But place-based impact investing is really where we can have impacts here within our city. That's when we take assets. In the philanthropic world, the traditional foundations would utilize their endowments. Others might use profits from a corporation to address to work on community needs by investing in specific projects that are local. A lot of times those can take the example of a super local coffee shop that gives an outlet to a community to come together, discuss folks, have a place to be. But it also could be in areas such as a social enterprise. Social enterprises are those that are typically for-profit that have a mission purpose. You hear a lot about these buy one, give one companies nationally, like Tom's Shoes might be one that you're familiar with. But we also have a lot of those social enterprises that operate here locally. Purposeful Design is an example of one of those companies. I happen to sit on the board of the Sagamore Institute, which is a local think tank that actually puts ideas into action. And we spun off the group Purposeful Design, which is a furniture manufacturer. They make unbelievably beautiful furniture. The grains in their tables and their desks, you just want to reach out and touch them. And those who are manufacturing that furniture and selling it for quite a handsome sum on the open market are folks who have been struggling in their lives with issues of homelessness, addiction, formerly incarcerated individuals, and others that have barriers. So through social enterprise or through the social enterprise structure, it gives folks an opportunity to invest in a for-profit business that then provides job training and jobs and income to individuals while making a profit and turning that profit back into additional investment in the community. So we've talked about impact investing in general and social enterprise. There's one more tool I just want to touch on real quickly. We're running out of time for it. Most of the benefits end at the end of this year, but there are opportunity zones. And those opportunity zones were created by the federal government into targeted communities. We have about 15 here in Indianapolis, and 51% of the population of those who live in enterprise zones are minorities. So, I'm sorry, in those opportunity zones. And so those are typically equity investments and their opportunities for real estate investments, and also to help small companies and others get started. So those are a few of the tools that are available to us, Una, that I just wanted to share with the audience to get us started.
Thank you so much, Claudia. We'll have to come back to you to dig a little bit deeper. I know we have still quite a bit to go and already some questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to ask the other panelists just to keep their comments, if possible, to 2 to 3 minutes each. And let's turn to Tiffany. You just heard from Claudia about the community's response to COVID-19. We have all been inspired by the work that you have led, actually, as head of the Eli Lilly and Company Foundation. In particular, at the onset of the racial and social justice movement right here in central Indiana, Eli Lilly and Company announced a $25 million commitment to racial equity. In addition, 25,000 volunteer hours. I don't know if that's over 1 year or 2 years or exactly what the time frame is, but I think all of us were really moved by that moment and a lot of the work that must have gone behind the scenes to make that happen. So let's turn to you and say, a crisis presents an opportunity. How are you meeting this crisis? What are you learning, and what can other funders learn from you? Because here's a large company, one of our most important corporations here in central Indiana, and you've taken the lead on this issue. So let's turn it over to you and hear how you are.
Thanks, Una. I really appreciate being invited here today. And I appreciate the rest of this panel because we've all been talking about all of these issues. So that shows you how much of a community effort this has been. Frankly, COVID and all of the events that have happened from a social justice component have really exacerbated issues that were already there. One of the exciting things that has come from that unfortunate circumstance is that there's been a lot more appetite for innovation. So for us, we're in the business of innovation. We're a pharmaceutical company, and the foundation is focused on topics like STEM. So in response to all of these things, we acted quickly, right? So we made a commitment to this $25 million. And as Claudia noted, our first tranche of funding went to the newly created Central Indiana Racial Equity Fund, which sits at CICF. We were open to new ideas and new innovations, but also a place where everybody could collaborate together. So there were a lot of funders who did that because we're talking about 400 years of issues that got us to the place we're at now. So it's going to take all of us collectively to look at solutions. For us at Lilly, it was really important that we did both the dollars commitment, but also the hours commitment. So when you think about social impact investing, as you were highlighting earlier, it's important to also note that your energy, right, your volunteerism and your commitment is equally as important as the money. So for us, as we think about both our philanthropy side and our company side, we know we have a lot of employees who want to get engaged. We know how a lot of nonprofits lack capacity to do all of the things they want to accomplish. And so we know that in the business community, we can give advice, counsel, we can listen, we can provide resources in a lot of different ways. I think the most important thing as we've thought about how we can lead is to listen, right? We don't have all of the solutions, and people who live in communities where they're challenged know what the challenges are. So it's important for us to be listeners and then say, how can we help? And that has been really the driving force behind the work that we've done, which is to say we're going to commit dollars and time, but we're going to ask the communities to help us thoughtfully come up with what those solutions should be.
Thank you. So you've just heard philanthropy is more than just money. It's also time, it's talent, and we've added a new T, which is testimony, using your platform, using your voice to highlight issues and to bring about change. So we are very fortunate to have on this panel Dr. Danette Howard. As many of you already know, Lumina has been at the forefront of raising issues, not just the giving money, giving time, but also advocacy around these issues. And advocacy, I think that would be with a small a. In other words, raising awareness about the importance of racial inequities and racial justice issues. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Danette Howard to tell us specifically, not just the work that you're doing in racial justice, but also how you're expanding the toolkit beyond traditional grant making, but also impact investments, program-related investments, all the different continuum of tools that you're using in this movement and moment that we're in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Osili. It's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel with such a dynamic group of women leaders in our city. You know, I'd like to pick up just where you left off, which is talking about all of the tools that we have in our toolkit and that we use and engage to do our work. Of course, we are most and best known for our grant making, but that is just one of our tools. We also think our thought leadership, or as you just called it, our testimonial, our ability to go out there and speak to audiences and try to convince or perhaps even influence audiences about some of these big issues that we care about. First and foremost now, racial equity. We also have our convening power, bringing groups together. That is, when we could come together, not just virtually, but in person, we would often bring people from all over the country together to talk about, grapple with, and try to develop solutions to some of these issues and problems. And within the last 5 years, we've added to our toolkit impact investing, which is really where our program-related investments reside. And we see this as a powerful way to not only bring new capital and attract new capital to the ideas that we are focused on, but also to bring new ideas and new ways of thinking, new partners to help us think about and build knowledge toward these issues. And as we think about not just our impact investing strategy, but our overall strategy, we've decided that equity will be first. It will be our first principle. It will be our first priority. And we compel our partners to take on that equity first orientation along with us. So by that, we mean that we expect for our partners to reflect the equity of the populations that we seek to serve. And with our traditional grant making and with our impact investments, we have been able to ensure that we are bringing on partners who don't just talk the talk, but they walk the walk in terms of the composition of their staff and the composition of their board. And so that has resulted in over half of the impact investments that we've made to date being led by people of color and or women, which, as many of you know, among social entrepreneurs, that balance isn't typically widely seen. So that's something that we are really proud of. Thank you. And just to give you two examples of our companies, the first is a company by the name of Edovo, which is focusing on bringing technological and telecommunications solutions to individuals who are incarcerated. Now, we know that people of color are disproportionately represented among that population. And so the company that we've invested in, Edovo, provides opportunities for them not only to communicate with their families, but also to get access to high quality educational opportunities. And we know they're going to need those credentials in order to lead a thriving life upon their release. And the second is Care Academy. It's a company that is owned by two women of color, and it is designed to make sure that in-home healthcare workers or health aides, and we know that sometimes these are among the lowest wage workers, that they are actually able to have access to a platform that provides them with additional education and training that they can then stack or contribute toward an associate's degree or a certificate. So those are just two examples of the way that we're trying to make a difference through our impact investing tool, and I look forward to discussing more.
Thank you so much. I think Danette just kicked us off to focus on the right thing. How do we make sure that we, across the board, have an equity lens in everything we do? So I'm really inspired, and also the examples you provided, I think, get us thinking about how this actually works on the ground. So that gets us to another question that keeps coming up as we think about how we tackle racial justice, and specifically, how can funders move the needle on this issue when I think several of you have already said this is 400 years in the making. It is not going to be fixed overnight, but we need to work with urgency. One perspective that I think we need to hear from right now is Alicia's perspective. In her role at CICF, one aspect of their strategy that has continued from the very beginning, many of you know that CICF has made tackling racial justice its central priority for its strategic mission, really, for the next 5 years. And so, Alicia, one point you made that really resonated with all of us is how do we hear from the community? How do we make sure that as we tackle racial justice and disparities in our community, that communities are represented, that they are at the table and that we hear their voices and they're part of not just implementing, but co-creating any strategies that are devised. So let's turn it over to you and share that. What are you hearing and learning, and how are you approaching this work, collaborating and partnering with communities?
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'm just really blessed to be with this phenomenal group of ladies. At CICF, the Central Indiana Community Foundation, we embarked on racial equity and inclusiveness and opportunities in 2016. And so at that beginning stage, we knew that we had to do the work differently. And so we incorporated the voice of the community at the forefront of our strategic planning. And so after that plan was completed, we knew we had to continue with that engagement. We saw it as an opportunity, one, to build mutual trust and relationships with community leaders, but then also connect to their networks into neighborhoods for it to be authentic. And then secondly, what we wanted to say is that it's all about accountability. What are the checks and balances that need to happen, not just within the organization or the institution, but what are those checks and balances from the community to ensure that we are doing and saying what we say we're going to do? Intentions are great, but behavior and outcomes to reduce or dismantle those disparities is key. And so we stay focused on that. And so we wanted to institutionalize community voice within our work. So we have this initiative called Community Ambassadors. And so those individuals, some of them are part of the original strategic planning process, but then we also built new relationships with community leaders. And so we are working with them every month. They have access not just to the people, but also to how the functioning of the organization works operationally, so they're internal as well. They see our policies, they see our staff component, personnel, they challenge us internally, but they also keep us faithful to those things that we need to deliver on in the community. So that's just one example that we're using as well. It's also an opportunity to create not just the community voice from an organization, but also look within your department. And so I'm on the grant making side. And so we also are trying to figure out what does that accountability look like with a more equitable grant making process. We've heard from Tiffany that they were the lead into the Central Indiana Racial Equity Fund. We used our influence to say, can we get a community ambassador a part of that process as well? So we're using our social capital to also bring in community voice into other areas that we're touching. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. Well, we've heard from you. I think the principle everyone needs to take away: trust and accountability are key. And equity starts from within your organization. You can't make change if you don't have it to start with within your organization. So I applaud the work that CICF is doing. And we are getting so many questions that I think we're going to have to quickly pivot to start answering the questions. So I'll start with just asking our panel to go around really 1 to 2 minutes each. And I'll ask the funders in the group what advice you have for other funders who want to do more work in racial equity and also who are interested in impact investing. How can they get started? So we'll start with both Tiffany and Dr. Danette Howard to just give us 1 or 2 strategies that have worked for you all as you have first started in this area, and what advice you'd give funders who want to jump in as they've heard about your work. So we'll start with the 2 of you. Just quick pointers for those who want to get involved.
Sure. I think the first thing is to reach out to other people. So I think I want to give Claudia a lot of credit here because the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance is really connected to a lot of foundations. And, you know, when we started in this space of doing bigger things in racial justice, Claudia was a great resource. So it's totally okay to ask other people, who should I be talking to? What should I be doing? The other thing I did is a lot of research, right? I didn't claim to be an expert, so I spent a lot of time reading. I made my team read a lot. We spent a lot of time on the internet, and we are constantly researching in every way possible, including calling people like Una. And so I think you need to make sure that your work is thoughtful and you aren't just reactive, but you have enough data to make smart calls.
I love it. Data and research are right up my own alley. So thank you. Now let's turn to Dr. Danette Howard, just some pointers for funders who want to get involved, because I think there are quite a few funders that are joining us today.
Sure. Well, I would start by saying that you have to be clear about what you're hoping to achieve. This is a moment where you see some individuals and perhaps some organizations being reactive to the moment, but what can you do to set up a strategy that will be sustainable and that actually will be focused on outcomes? So for us, as we reaffirmed our commitment really to equity this year, that meant being very clear, first of all, about what we meant by equity, right? So for us, that means we'll have an equitable world when outcomes cannot be determined by race or ethnicity. And we wanted to have a crystal clear definition so that everyone in our organization could know it and could ensure that their work was reflected in that definition. And we added to our commitment to equity the word justice, because justice is about dismantling systems of oppression and institutional racism. And in order to really kind of eradicate these injustices, we have to get to the root cause of the problem, which is the dismantling of those systems. And finally, I would have to say, each organization has to identify what their non-negotiables are. What are their bright lines that they are not willing to cross? And for us, we had to take a hard look in the proverbial mirror and say, our grantees, our partners do not fully reflect the equity populations that we have prioritized. So we have to do things differently. That means we are going to expect that our partners are diverse in terms of representation, and not just in terms of structural representation, but that there is a sense of equity mindedness, that they can talk about what they've done to be able to lead on equity. It's easy to say I have equity as a priority, but what's the self-work that has happened within that organization? And then also, what does your board leadership look like? And so that means that some of our longtime partners might find themselves on the other side of our equity first commitment. And so we will have to perhaps make some very tough decisions or provide some additional opportunities for our partners to become more equity focused and equity first centric.
Fantastic point. So you have to start with a clear objective and strategy. And you also have to look both within your current strategy and externally as well. So putting all this together, as I look at the questions coming in, we also have individuals who are social entrepreneurs themselves, small business owners, folks who have ideas, or communities that are working on these issues already, and they want to know, how can we partner with these funders? So I'm going to open it up to Claudia and Alicia to jump in here and tell us, if you are someone who is seeking funding for a social enterprise, what are some things you should take away from this panel? What are some 1, 2, 3 things that I should be doing or you should be doing? And I will ask you just in the interest of time. All right.
I can go first. I have
Okay.
some really quick thoughts.
Okay.
And it's do your research and know who is invested in what areas. A lot of information is available on the internet, monitor news media, and so forth. Be creative in your approaches and be brave and bold. This is not a time for folks to sit back and be complacent or to be reticent, but to use their voice. Those are broad thoughts. Alicia, do you have more specific guidance?
Yeah, I would just add that, philanthropy is more than just monetary investments, right? There's also social capital and networks. And so lean into those opportunities to connect, because we can help shepherd you into other areas of expertise and also ability to reach your goal. The other thing I would just add is that make sure there's value alignment. And so when you're doing your research, make sure that you're meeting, you're not coming off of your values to meet the need of the funder or the investor, but that you're staying true to yourself and sense of value, but you're also seeing an opportunity to leverage the value of who you are wanting to partner with.
Both wonderful. I don't know if Tiffany or Danette want to add 1 or 2 words of encouragement for the social entrepreneurs, because quite a few people asked, how do I get access to funding? Any 1 or 2 ideas?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. The first is have a roadmap and milestones within it, right? So we're talking about long-term problems, and make sure you're right-sizing your request. So sometimes people will come and just say, can I have money? Which, it's hard to say yes to can I have money without a plan. And you need to have goals, and you need to tell people when you're going to accomplish A and when you're going to accomplish B, and what happens if you don't accomplish A, and how you're going to pivot. So I think there needs to be a lot of thought in proposals. For us, we have been out in the community, not just me, but a lot of other people who are senior at Lilly, the company, and with the foundation, talking to people and listening. And we're doing more of that work. So our doors are open. That does not mean I'm going to promise everybody funding, but it means that we're accessible and our information is on the internet, but we are also just out talking to people. Because we understand that in particular for people of color, they may not have been exposed to large funders before. And so we need to make sure we are doing that reach out to the community ourselves so we can make those connections.
Okay. Tiffany, you just raised a very important point. I wanted to just center some of your comments. When we look at venture capital, only 4% of venture capital goes to Black and brown entrepreneurs. When you look at women of color, they're getting even a smaller slice of the pie. That's also true for small business loans, bank loans, you name it, across the capital continuum. Danette, Dr. Danette Howard, do you have 1 or 2 pieces of advice for social entrepreneurs who are on the part of our audience today who would love to get some strategies for success?
Sure. I would say to either begin or continue to be very proactive about building relationships. Even if there is not a funding opportunity available now that is readily aligned with the work that you're doing, this might be the very best time to reach out to an organization like mine for a conversation. We have conversations with everyone. I don't think that anyone has ever wanted to talk with someone about Lumina, about some work that they're doing, when we haven't been more than happy to do that. And oftentimes we aren't the right funder, but we are part of many funder networks. So we can then connect you with another organization that might be just right for you. So I would say, don't be disappointed if you get a no, because a no today could turn into a big yes, even 2 years down the line when the right opportunity makes itself available. But those relationships are so important. I think that's really the key.
Excellent. Relationships matter. We hear that a lot, but especially when it comes to funding. So let's turn our attention to the future. All of us have been processing the events, not just here in Central Indiana, nationally and even globally. Those of us who have parents who marched during the civil rights movement feel like this is another, maybe even bigger movement than that one was, because this is global. We have communities around the world that are participating. So are we starting to see change here in Central Indiana? Are there perhaps opportunities that you see opening up that let's leave on a note of hope for our audience? And what do you think on your everyday world as a funder, as a leader in our community? What gives you hope as you go through your work, and what you see on the horizon that we can all take away and say, okay, this is what I should be thinking about? And I can just kick it off by saying what I have drawn inspiration from in this moment is actually reading and listening to a lot of the work from the civil rights movement. I'm listening to John Lewis's autobiography or biography memoirs right now on Audible. So just being a part of that, understanding that change takes all of us, and it takes people of faith and purpose to make things happen has been very uplifting. So that's what's keeping me encouraged. And I realize it's not one person, it takes everyone. That is a point that John Lewis makes a lot. And he also makes the point that you have to have hope. You cannot worry about who is against you, but look for people who are for you. So I will open it up to everyone, but let's start with Alicia. Alicia, what is keeping you motivated? What signs of progress do you see? I know CICF was in this work way before other funders, so you may even have a lot of reasons to be hopeful right now. So please share them with us.
Sure. I would just say that the community consciousness has awoken everyone. And so CICF does not feel alone. We started this work, a while ago. And so I feel like it's all hands on deck with everyone, corporate, nonprofits, philanthropy. So it's a sense of really being able to do it in a way that's unifying and bringing everyone along. I will just add one thing, that this work is transformational. It's not transactional. And so it's long term. And so being able to create that momentum, like Tiffany said, I believe having benchmarks where you can see wins, but that's the driving force that's going to keep us moving along. And I am hopeful. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, Claudia, what is giving you hope? You've seen this around the state, not just in central Indiana. So what is keeping you motivated, passionate, encouraged during this time?
Yeah, you mentioned the around the state. So we are a statewide organization, and I was going to speak to that. I think that what's very interesting, first of all, in the philanthropy community, that folks are really tearing down walls and removing barriers that have existed for years that never really made sense to me. So, when Tiffany was talking about, we're not just having our website, but we're actually going out on the streets and meeting with folks because people don't actually know how to interact with a foundation. I see stories of that happening all over the state where folks are, reducing the amount of requirements they have for grant applications, shortening the amount of time it takes to get money out the door, coming together with communities for listening sessions. But most importantly, when you look at Indiana and you get outside of Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Northwest Indiana, we're a very white state and we're rural and we have a lot of ugly history. And what I am most encouraged by is the fact that across this state, folks who have never given any thought to racial difference or equity or equality or justice are coming to us and saying, no matter how tiny, no matter how white my county is, I want to help, I want to get involved, I don't want to be the problem anymore. And I think that that's where I'm really taking my inspiration in this moment.
Wonderful. Okay, let's hear from Tiffany. You are also in the lead on this, and Eli Lilly and Company is a global company. So are there any signs of hope even on the global dimension as well?
Yeah, am I hopeful? Absolutely. And I'm excited that we're going to see movement. I can see it, right? We're not the only corporation that made these announcements, and we're not the only foundation. Danette talked about Lumina, but Anthem here in town is another global company that's made a large commitment, and a lot of other companies have done the same thing. I think, like everybody has said, breaking down barriers, having conversations, that's really left me optimistic. And for me, we've been working on inequity and racial inequity through our education work and our healthcare work for a long time. But we actually made the movement to name one of our focus areas for the foundation, combating racial injustice. When we name it and own it, that means we make movement on it. And so I'm so excited to see so many people naming it, talking about it, owning it, and understanding that it's on all of us. That's thrilling. And that's why I think there's so much possibility, because everybody understands that every single one of us has a part in the solution.
Naming it and owning it. I love it. So is real progress. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Danette Howard to give us the last word here, and I'll see if we have time to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I just want to share that after Mr. Floyd's murder in May, I was actually very sad and angry. And, you know, it took a moment for me to realize that joy is actually a form of resistance. So I'm going to find joy where I can. And one of those places is in being able to do this work for systemic change. So I just wanted to give you 2 examples of something that inspires me and continues to give me hope. And that is the resilience and fortitude of the leaders who are really at the forefront of this movement. So the first example is Dr. Ruth Simmons. Many of you know that she was the first African-American to serve as the president of an Ivy League institution, Brown University. And she actually came out of retirement to go back to serve as the president of Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically Black college and university in Texas. Sandra Bland was an alumnus of Prairie View A&M and was actually on her way back to Prairie View to begin a job when she had that unfortunate encounter which cost her her life. So Dr. Ruth Simmons is launching at Prairie View the Center for Racial Justice and Equity and is simultaneously launching the Sandra Bland Award to honor heroic measures of everyday students who are really making a change in their local community. And so Dr. Simmons is on the kind of tail end of her career, but at the beginning is a young man named Carlos Vera that I'm working with, who started an organization called Pay Our Interns. And we know that many of the most lucrative internships across this nation, including many congressional internships, don't pay students. And it is very difficult for many Black and brown students and low income and poor students to give up a summer or a semester of earnings in order to take on one of those internships. So that is the purpose of his organizations. We are going to be supporting them, and the tireless and innovative efforts of leaders like the 2 I just mentioned are what continue to give me hope.
Excellent. Well, this has been amazing and inspiring. I think all of us have taken something from this panel. I just want to turn our attention back to our panelists and thank them for their words of wisdom, their insights, but also their work on the front lines of fighting and tackling racial injustice. So let's all continue to do this work. As you've all heard, it's going to take all of us. And I thank you for being the positive forces for change that you all are in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to you, Una, as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.